I tell people I did graduate in the top 10 in my graduating class, and I do pretty good until they ask how many were in that class. Um, I'm pretty sure it was even smaller than that school in the movie Hoosier. Uh, and if I'd had Jimmy Chitwood's jump shot, I probably wouldn't be resorting to this life that I've chosen now either. So study. Uh, Growing up on that cotton farm and attending that small country school, and I learned the lessons of hard work, and I lived by the motto of that little school that I grew up in: is no dream too tall for a school so small. As I talk to Americans during this campaign, I find that despite their many concerns, that very few people in this country have stopped dreaming big dreams. The American people may be down, but they're sure not out. And they're sure not soft, as our president would make us believe. After almost 3 years of these failed policies, I think we're ready to give this White House some tough medicine. We can do better. We can do better than 1 out of 6 work-eligible Americans who are looking for full-time work. We can do better than that. We can do better than 45 million Americans who are on food stamps. We can do better than 48% of American households with someone who's receiving a government benefit. And the choice this election is about whether we're going to keep a president who has failed to create jobs and who is pro-bailout, pro-government mandated health care, pro-cap and trade, or whether we're going to change the course and elect a president who will give consumers greater freedom, who will protect us from job-killing carbon schemes, and who will support policies that are good for Main Street and not just Wall Street. We can do better. We must do better. If anything is symbolic of what this administration has the wrong priorities, it's their jobs agenda. The next economic boom is right under our feet. Our own oil resources alone are vast enough to meet the next 300 years of energy demand at today's levels. Just think about that. We have the answer, my friends. It's right below our own feet. And what has been this administration's response to our energy potential? They've thrown up every bureaucratic obstacle possible in order to advance an activist agenda. Exploration in the Gulf, in Alaska, in the Mid-Atlantic have all been severely restricted. Hostility to natural gas exploration means vast resources like the Marcellus Shale east of where we're standing will not be produced to its potential. Not only are they stopping energy exploration in federal waters, they've restricted it on federal lands, especially in the western states and in Alaska. And with this new wave of regulation under consideration at the EPA, it's only going to get worse. Examples include this is some technical wording, but it's really important to understand what the EPA is up to here. Utility Maximum Available Control Technology Rule, the Cross-State Air Pollution Rule. I talked to one of your producers today, and 2 power plants in this state are going to be shut down because of this cross-state air pollution rule. The proposed coal combustion residuals regulation, that's a section of 316B of the Clean Water Act. I mean, all of those are standing between jobs and America being more energy dependent. If those are all fully implemented, these rules will kill 1.6 million American jobs by 2020 and add $127 billion in cost to the electric sector. Now think about that. And we all know higher costs for businesses lead to higher prices for consumers. The reality is that none of these new rules were needed, as America reduced emissions in the 6 principal pollutants by 50% since 1980. My state, for one, reduced ozone levels by 27% just in the last decade. 58% reduction in the nitrogen oxide levels since 2000. What are they proposing? And why are they using this bureaucratic overkill? It's killing our economy. I mean, this is as clear as the nose on your face what this administration is doing. Just yesterday, the president was in Pittsburgh. He wanted to discuss a report from the President's Council on Jobs and Competitiveness. Contained in that report is a recommendation to build the Keystone Pipeline to move Canadian crude to refineries in the Gulf Coast, to resume deep water exploration in the Gulf of Mexico, and to unleash exploration of shale formations that can be accessed with new technologies. The question is whether the president's going to listen to his advisors on jobs or competitiveness, or is he going to listen to the activists that are pushing an agenda that pits environment against the economy? That's the question. I'm going to be in Pittsburgh Friday, and I'm going to announce my own energy jobs plan, and I can promise you this: I'm going to take the side of workers and employers in America. That's who I'm going to be standing with. My plan is going to deal with the very real threat that's posed by this increasing dependence on hostile sources of foreign oil. And I'll take on the head of that agency that is deliberately sacrificing our energy security to endure itself to that activist base. The cost of this policy is not only the loss of jobs, but it's the increased reliance on Middle Eastern and Venezuelan oil, because green sources of energy are not abundant enough to fill the void that's going to be posed by these new constraints placed on conventional generation. It is a dangerous policy that jeopardizes our economic and national security, and I will reverse it. Listen, there are three pillars that serve as the foundation of our country: a strong economy, strong families, and a strong military. In my home state, we've created close to 40% of all the net new jobs since June of 2009. Our success is based on four principles. Number one is don't spend all the money. Have some fiscal restraint. Two is keep your taxes low. Three is provide that fair and predictable regulatory climate. And four, stop the frivolous lawsuits which kill jobs. We passed the most sweeping tort reform in the nation, which includes a new loser pays provision, as the federal chairman warns that this recovery, as he referred to it, is close to faltering. Just last week, the Texas Comptroller released new information that our tax revenues in my home state had rebounded to pre-recession levels. Listen, Texas is not immune to the effects of the national economic environment, but recent reports show that a low, flat, and fair tax, reasonable and predictable regulations, restrained government spending is a proven recipe for job creation. You see, the key to prosperity is liberty. Yet the larger government grows, the smaller our circle of liberty becomes. The most basic unit of government is family. And as a conservative, I believe that government closest to the family, closest to the people, is the best government. There should not be a single policy coming out of Washington that interferes with the decisions that are made by American families. Millions of our neighbors are born into less than ideal circumstances, such as poverty or without a parent. But as a society, we must stand on the principle that every life is worth living, regardless of the circumstance. You know, in America, it's not where you're from that matters, it's where you're going. We must be all about giving future generations an equal shot or better at living the American dream. Our mission must not only be to provide that economic opportunity, but we also need to instill character. Young Americans must never be taught about rights without also being taught about responsibilities as well. We must not proclaim the responsibilities of a free society and ignore the responsibilities of free individuals. We must never mistake liberty for license. You see, one is a right, and the other leads to bondage. For more than a generation, our culture has emphasized a message of self-indulgence at the expense of social obligation, and we've reaped the consequences in the form of teen pregnancies, divorced and broken families, a cycle of incarceration that brings fathers and sons together behind bars. The fabric of our society is not government or even individual freedom. It is the family. And the demise of the family is the demise of any great society. You know, America has never been steered off track when we have advocated policies that expand freedom and promote strong families. But neither, I should say, can be preserved without an unwavering commitment to our national security. And Americans were truly blessed to have the greatest fighting force of freedom around the globe, and that's the young men and women of the United States military. You know, there's some out there who've said, oh, you know, we don't have any heroes anymore. And my, how wrong those individuals are. We have heroes today who are fighting in the sands of Iraq and Afghanistan, who are on covert missions to find and destroy the enemy, who put their lives on the line so that we don't have to. Over the years, I've met a great number of those young Americans. I've traveled to their forward outposts in Iraq and Afghanistan. I've signed letters to their loved ones when they made the ultimate sacrifice. I consider myself fortunate to have once worn the uniform of this country. And that experience informs my perspective about our defense priorities, the policies that will be made in this country. Specifically, I believe we must never put the military on the chopping block for arbitrary budget cuts as part of some political horse trade. Never. The question needs to be not whether or not we can afford to spend on our military, but what it costs for us to remain secure and free. You can't have liberty. You can't have opportunity. You can't have prosperity without security. The issue before leaders of both parties is securing a better future for all Americans. Americans are not under any illusions about the current state of our country. They have never mistaken hope for a handout. They aren't looking for soaring speeches, but they're looking for common sense solutions. And they know our first order of business, the key to getting America working again, is sending our current president to the private sector as soon as possible. So, like you, I still believe in the exceptionalism of America. To paraphrase both Abraham Lincoln and Ronald Reagan, America remains the last best hope of mankind. We must never forget that the exceptionalism of America can be traced to our founding principles and the fact that the framers of our Constitution were the first in history of man to declare all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. The hand of providence has guided America throughout our history. From the first colonists to arrive in the New World, to the courage of George Washington during his darkest hour at Valley Forge, to the defeat of tyranny during 2 world wars and the Cold War. Time and again, America has been that source of light in a world beset by darkness. Like a lighthouse perched on the shore, we provided safe harbor for millions adrift in a sea of economic misery. We can still be the country that we aspire to, a source of light and hope to all who live here and those who come here. Anchored by our ideals, we can rebuild on the solid foundation of truth instead of the shifting sands of moral relativism. We can restore hope at home while projecting our values abroad. And we can be the freest, most prosperous people to ever occupy the planet if we will remain one nation under God. Thank you. Thank you all for coming out and being with us today. Thank you. I think we're going to, great, thank you. We're going to take a few questions.
If you prefer to stand, we can, and I can back out, or we can sit.
Let's just stand, if you don't mind. I think I can see them, and some in the back aren't going to be able to see us, so let's just stand. We were going to sit and make it home week.
That's right, that's right. Governor, I know you've come from New Hampshire last night, and it is true. New Hampshire plays a critical role in the process, being the nation's first primary. Here in Indiana, we hope to also play a key role in crowning the nominee. So it means just an awful lot to us that you would spend today with us and kick off your Hoosier campaign here. Just a few questions, if I may. And you touched on this. Here in Indiana, we've been laser focused on the debt and the annual deficit spending. What are some of those national issues or obstacles that stand in the way to getting our fiscal house in order?
Well, one of the things that I like to remind people is that for the last decade, I've operated under a government that required a balanced budget. As a matter of fact, I've signed 6 balanced budgets as the governor of the state of Texas. And we need a president who, until it is passed, will on a daily basis remind the American people that there is a way to get the spending in Washington, D.C. under control, and that is by passing a federal balanced budget amendment to the United States Constitution. And work it. Go promote it in the states. Go through the process, and finally Americans will trust Congress that they will not spend more money than what we have coming in. And the only way to do that, I will suggest to you, is have that balanced budget amendment signed. And we've got to delegate the power back to the states. I truly believe with all my heart that one-size-fits-all mentality that we've seen out of Washington, D.C. for way too long is one of the real travesties, one of the real problems that America faces, whether it's how to deliver health care. Obamacare is an absolute, it's a disaster. It's a disaster economically. It is a disaster from the standpoint of access to health care. And doing away, repealing Obamacare is so important. And allow the states, I can promise you, you got one smart governor in Mitch Daniels. I mean, you got a brilliant governor. And Bobby Jindal in Louisiana. I mean, the list can go on and on of men and women like Nikki Haley in South Carolina, Susana Martinez, my neighbor over in New Mexico. Those governors best know how to create health care systems for their state, for instance, that will put more people under appropriate health care, affordable health care, give people more choices. But if we continue to allow Washington to be the be-all and know-all, the one-size-fits-all, then I think this country is headed down a track where not only is the quality of health care going to become less and less, and the cost will become more and more. And I'll give you one example. If we do not repeal Obamacare, and it does become the law, or not the law of the land, but implemented in 2014. My home state, the additional cost is $2.7 billion every year over and above I mean, that will cause huge tax implications. It will cause, I will suggest to you, a substantial amount of people not getting the type of health care that they could have if we leave this back to the states. And I haven't even gotten into the education side of things yet. I mean, the idea that a bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. needs to be telling people in Indiana how to educate your children is beyond me. The federal government does not need to be involved in telling you how to educate your children. And we could get into the energy side of things as well and the environmental side as well. I'm going to save the bulk of that for Friday as I give that speech in Pennsylvania. But just know this, I truly trust the people. I think our founding fathers were incredibly visionary when they set up our form of government. And they meant for Washington to do a few things very good and very well, like securing our border. It'd be really good if they would do some things that they're constitutionally supposed to be doing. And let the states come up with the solutions that best fit their needs in their states.
Thank you. Indiana consistently always ranks at the top of the list on best places to do business. And surprise, surprise, Texas is always at the top of that list as well. What are the factors that contribute to your success in Texas?
Well, I'm going to go back and talk about your governor and your lieutenant governor. As a matter of fact, I was visiting with her as I came in today, and she had to leave and go to a city to announce the opening of a new manufacturing facility in the state. And I told her, I said, that's how it's supposed to work. And it's not, this is really pretty simple, but you have to have courageous men and women that are willing to implement the tax policy, the regulatory policy, the legal reform to make your state more competitive with the neighboring state, or maybe it's a state halfway across the country. And there are some people that I guess are uncomfortable with that, that they don't want you to show up on their doorstep knocking on a businesses and saying, would you come to Indiana, because we've created a climate in Indiana. I'll promise you what your leadership has done in this state is made the surrounding states' leadership uncomfortable. But that's okay, because that's what competition's really supposed to be about. My bet is that the Colts don't mind at all beating everybody on their schedule. That's just my bet. Because competition is what makes you better. It's what makes you better, whether it's on an athletic field or whether it's in a state capitol. And never get confused. Government has never created one permanent job yet that first was not paid for with taxpayer money. The private sector is where jobs are created, truly. And for us as a country, we've got to get back to that. I mean, we got a president of the United States that has been involved in an experimentation with our country, putting economic policies into place that have been absolute failures. He stood up before us and said 3.5 million jobs will be created if we take this stimulus and put it into the economy, almost $1 trillion. It was a disaster, Mr. President, an absolute disaster. The only way that you create jobs in this country is by letting government create the environment where the private sector knows that they can go out and risk their capital and have a chance to have a return on investment. That is the only way. So I'm gonna pitch this back to you, but it really requires 4 principles. And I mentioned them in my remarks, but I want to go back because they're so profound, they're so simple. But number 1 is don't spend all the money. Have that fiscal restraint. Have tax policy that is as light a burden on the job creators as it can be, still delivering the needed services. Have a regulatory climate that is fair, yet predictable, and a legal system that stops the frivolous lawsuits and creates jobs. And then government needs needs to get out of the way and let the private sector do what the private sector does best, which is create jobs. That's it.
Governor, you alluded to a speech you're giving, I think, this Friday in Pittsburgh about your economic and your energy plans. Now that you have hundreds of Hoosier friends in one room at one place, could you give us all maybe a sneak peek?
Yes, sir. Well, obviously, the affordable side of our energy, the security side of our energy that I made remarks about, and the domestic job creation, they all go hand in hand. If we truly want to get America back working again, I mean, and I'm talking about solid, high-paying jobs. There are men and women sitting around in their living room today who don't have a job because of the economic policies this administration has put in place. There's 14+ million Americans that are out of work out there. There's 45 million Americans that are on food stamps today. And I don't think that's where they want to be. They'd love to have the dignity of a job to take care of their families. And one of the fastest ways for that to happen is for a President of the United States who will open up our domestic exploration and our domestic lands where all of these resources can be produced. And we can do it in an environmentally friendly and safe way. We know we can do that. We have the capability and the technology. At the same time, people ask the question, why have we lost our manufacturing edge? Well, the reason's pretty simple, is because we taxed it and we regulated it out of this country. And it went offshore. And people, well, we're never going to get that back. Yes, we can get it back. But when you think about why did it go over there, one of the reasons it went over there was because it was cheaper to manufacture. And the coal, for instance, industry, the coal that's used in China today, I believe is threefold what it was a decade ago. So they're still creating that greenhouse or those gases that are coming out for those that want to talk about that particular impact. But the fact is the jobs left America. You can bring those jobs back to America, but it requires tax policy and regulatory policy. As a matter of fact, in my home state, we were able to bring a company back out of China and South Korea who was manufacturing over in that part of the world back to Texas. So they committed patriot, but it was also a person who understood that you can come back and have that type of climate. And that all interweaves into the entire story about creating environments in this country. But it starts at the top. We have to have a president that truly understands what people are going through in this country. That there's real misery out there. Not having the dignity to take care of your family. Because this president would rather listen to an environmental activist than he will the pleas and the cries of the people without a job. That's what this election is really about. You elect me, you're President of the United States, and we will get America working again. God bless you, and thank you all for coming out and being with us today.